Deep in the mountainous, karst terrain of Guangxi, massive detonations of industrial explosives are tearing through limestone bedrock to carve a 134-kilometer artificial river. Right now, heavy excavators and fleets of autonomous dump trucks are moving 340 million cubic meters of earth, tearing out enough raw bedrock and topsoil to completely bury the entire island of Manhattan under 20 feet of solid debris. This is the $10 billion Pingloo Canal project. When completed, this massive civil engineering marvel will slash the shipping distance from China's inland industrial heartland to the open ocean by over 560 kilometers. A single man-made waterway is actively slicing through mountains to establish a direct, uninterrupted pipeline to the Beibu Gulf. China is not merely upgrading its domestic trade infrastructure, it is fundamentally redrawing the physical geometry of international shipping. In the Western Hemisphere, critical maritime arteries are collapsing under the weight of climate vulnerability and systemic delay. International logistics auditors point out that the Panama Canal, once the undisputed crown jewel of global commerce, is suffering from catastrophic operational paralysis. A severe, prolonged drought has drained the freshwater lakes that feed its massive lock system, forcing authority officials to drastically slash daily vessel transits. Hundreds of multi-million-dollar container ships sit anchored at sea for weeks, burning expensive marine fuel while waiting for a single passage slot. Global trade watchdogs suggest that these legacy maritime monopolies actively refuse to modernize their core infrastructure. They rely on century-old designs that bleed millions of gallons of precious fresh water into the ocean with every single vessel transit. When severe environmental shocks strike, the entire Western supply chain grinds to a devastating halt. Transit delays multiply, emergency surcharges skyrocket, and multinational shipping conglomerates pass these staggering financial losses straight to everyday consumers. Maritime economists argue that this fragile, highly volatile logistics pipeline exposes a critical vulnerability in global commerce. A single dry spell in Central America can instantly freeze billions of dollars in containerized cargo. While Western operators struggle to manage backlogs and debate emergency rationing protocols, China looked at this decaying global infrastructure and executed a $10 billion response, a localized capital deployment massive enough to purchase 3 top-tier NFL franchises in pure cash. Instead of hoping for rain or paying exorbitant queuing fees at bottlenecked international straits, China decided to carve its own deep-water highway straight through mountains. The Pingloo Canal bypasses the heavily congested, highly circuitous maritime detours winding through the Pearl River Delta and the port of Guangzhou. By routing freight straight from the inland rivers of Guangxi into the Beibu Gulf, China establishes a frictionless, highly automated trade pipeline directly into the sea. This massive civil engineering effort moves Guangxi from the periphery of international trade directly to the center of global maritime logistics. How does a civil engineering team engineer a series of massive inland locks capable of dropping heavy cargo ships 65 meters through solid rock without draining the regional water supply? Subscribe to the channel right now to make sure you never miss a deep dive into the engineering megaprojects quietly reshaping our world. The geographic prison of southwest China choked economic growth for a century. Provinces like Yunnan and Guizhou hold massive reserves of raw phosphate fertilizer, industrial aluminum, and dense agricultural goods. Yet, these highly lucrative commodities remain locked behind impenetrable limestone mountain ranges. For decades, domestic cargo was forced to navigate the winding, shallow routes of the Pearl River system. Barges traveled hundreds of unnecessary miles eastward toward the saturated coastal ports of Guangdong just to find open water. This sprawling, highly inefficient detour punished local industries with exorbitant transit times and heavy fuel burns. Buyers across Southeast Asia historically paid a massive premium just to cover the cost of this convoluted domestic transit. Cheng Yaofei, commander of the Pingloo Canal Project Construction Command, recognized that standard rail networks could never handle this raw volume of bulk commodities. He initiated an unprecedented geotechnical assault directly on the landscape. Rather than building another highway over the mountains, his engineering teams are literally blasting an entirely new ocean route straight through the solid bedrock. They are permanently severing the region's dependence on the congested Guangdong port corridor. The physical scale of this excavation defies standard civil construction metrics. Heavy machinery operators and autonomous drilling fleets are actively tearing out roughly 339 million cubic meters of earth and stone. They are taking the Yinjiangbuhan River, historically a winding, narrow course prone to devastating seasonal flooding, and violently straightening it into a Class 1 inland waterway. The Madao Junction acts as the core hub of this sprawling network. Massive steel and concrete towers rise 80 meters directly above the excavated riverbed, housing thousands of tons of newly fabricated metal structures required to tame the water flow. The economic calculus behind this raw geographical manipulation is undeniable. By connecting the inland Zijin Reservoir directly to the Beibu Gulf, the Pingloo Canal permanently deletes 560 kilometers of wasted travel distance from the standard shipping route. This massive geographical shortcut generates a projected $730 million in annual logistics savings for the region. That represents a localized capital retention mathematically equivalent to purchasing 2 brand new Boeing 777 passenger jets in pure cash every single year, generated entirely by eliminating wasted marine diesel. The sheer logistics of managing this construction site are staggering. At peak operation, the Madao Junction alone swarmed with over 5,000 workers racing against aggressive deadlines. They poured millions of tons of high-strength concrete to form the massive walls of the waterway, securing the trench against intense monsoon rains and typhoons. During a recent extreme weather event, upstream inflows topped 700 million cubic meters, threatening to inundate the entire basin. Because Chang Yaofei's teams had aggressively widened and deepened the river channel, the newly excavated canal easily regulated the torrential flow, safely discharging 3,500 cubic meters of water per second. It protected nearby cities from catastrophic flooding while the heavy excavation work continued unimpeded. This dual-purpose infrastructure transforms a passive waterway into an active, highly controlled logistical weapon. China is permanently bypassing the historic Pearl River estuary. By redirecting up to 95 million tons of cargo southward by 2035, the canal directly feeds the expanding deep-water berths at Qinzhou and Fangchenggang. The entire southern supply chain is being re-engineered to operate with zero geographic friction. However, carving a flat river through a jagged, mountainous landscape is physically impossible. Ships navigating this new artery must safely descend a massive geographic shelf before they ever reach the ocean. Dropping a fully loaded 5,000-ton cargo vessel 65 meters through a mountain range requires extreme hydrodynamic control. That total elevation difference represents a sheer vertical plunge mathematically equivalent to dropping a fully loaded commercial freighter off the roof of a 20-story high-rise. To execute this massive descent safely without tearing the ships apart in turbulent currents, engineers designed 3 colossal cascade hubs: Madao, Qixi, and Qingnian. These hubs utilize a highly advanced mechanical layout to conquer the uneven, jagged topography. The lock chambers measure 300 meters in length and 34 meters in width, standing as the largest inland ship locks ever constructed anywhere on the planet. The sheer mass of the hardware is staggering. The metal structures managing the flow at Madao alone total 25,000 tons of heavy steel. The massive miter gates, the primary doors holding back the crushing weight of the river, are connected to heavy-duty hydraulic hoists. Despite their immense weight, these gates are engineered for blistering operational speed. They require only 1 minute to swing fully open and a mere 30 seconds to securely lock shut. This highly optimized transit window allows the facility to process 6 massive cargo vessels every single hour, maintaining a relentless, high-volume flow of international trade. Managing the water volume for a 65-meter drop introduces a terrifying resource constraint. Standard maritime locks across the globe are incredibly wasteful by design. They forcefully flush millions of gallons of precious inland freshwater directly into the ocean every single time a vessel cycles through the chamber. Chinese civil engineers recognized that dumping this massive volume of water would quickly drain the regional reservoirs during arid, dry seasons. They entirely rejected this primitive, loss-heavy design by engineering an aggressive, high-efficiency water-saving cascade system. The Pingloo locks feature massive, interconnected storage basins built directly adjacent to the main concrete chambers. When a ship descends and the lock empties, the displaced water is not carelessly dumped into the sea. It is temporarily captured and held inside these subterranean concrete vaults. When the next vessel needs to rise, gravity smoothly feeds that exact same water back into the active chamber. This flawless recycling loop actively slashes the canal's overall freshwater consumption by an astounding 63%. This extreme water preservation is only half of the mechanical equation. At the lowest cascade, the Qingyan hub physically meets the raw ocean tide of the Maui Sea. This creates a highly volatile salt freshwater confluence zone. Dense, highly corrosive seawater naturally attempts to aggressively push upstream into the newly carved channel during high tide. If this tidal intrusion is ignored, the ocean water will rapidly contaminate the Qingyan Reservoir, utterly destroying the pristine freshwater aquifers that supply domestic drinking water and vital agricultural irrigation to Qinzhou City. To neutralize this ecological threat, engineers deployed sophisticated pneumatic anti-saltwater intrusion gates directly at the estuarine boundary. Highly advanced sensors continuously monitor the vertical salinity gradient within the water column. Because saltwater is denser than freshwater, the system precisely identifies the exact depth of the heavier ocean water creeping invisibly along the riverbed. The pneumatic gates deploy precisely timed air curtains and rigid physical barriers to isolate this dense saltwater layer. The system traps the corrosive tide at the bottom of the lock and forcefully flushes it back out into the bay during the chamber's cycling process. This micromechanism strictly preserves the absolute purity of the inland water supply, while simultaneously processing endless fleets of ocean-bound freighters. The system completely isolates the fragile inland ecosystem from the harsh marine environment. The physical magnitude of this trench shatters every historical precedent for civil excavation. When engineers constructed the massive Three Gorges Dam, they displaced roughly 102 million cubic meters of earth and rock. Commander Cheng Yaofei's autonomous drilling fleets are currently tearing out over 315 million cubic meters of raw material. This staggering extraction rate triples the total terrestrial displacement of China's legendary mega dam. The Pingloo operation removes enough solid mass to completely bury the city of San Francisco under a thick layer of pulverized bedrock. They are not merely digging a commercial ditch. They are physically relocating an entire mountain range to accommodate international freight. High-capacity electric excavators operate relentlessly along the 134-kilometer stretch. The air across the Guangxi Mountains remains constantly thick with limestone dust. To manage this unprecedented volume of waste rock, engineers deployed a highly integrated, vertically aligned logistics grid. A fragmented international project would rely on hundreds of disjointed private trucking contractors. That outdated method burns massive amounts of diesel fuel and creates paralyzing traffic jams. Chinese engineers rejected this chaotic approach. They engineered a centralized, electric-powered conveyor system stretching directly across the rugged terrain. These massive automated belts transport pulverized bedrock straight from the active blasting zones to designated coastal reclamation sites. This zero-friction logistics pipeline eliminates the unpredictable bottlenecks that frequently destroy Western infrastructure schedules. The actual physics of cutting a 134-kilometer trench through uneven karst topography demands extreme metallurgical endurance. The bedrock beneath Guangxi is notoriously jagged and unpredictable. To punch through this dense geological armor, the construction command deployed fleets of rotary blast hole drills. These machines utilize heavy-duty hydraulic pressure to drive hardened steel bits deep into the earth. Once the holes are bored, specialists pack them with highly calibrated commercial explosives. They detonate these charges using microsecond delay triggers to minimize seismic shockwaves. This surgical blasting technique shatters the limestone into perfectly sized fragments without destabilizing the surrounding valley walls. After the dust settles, the electric excavators move in to clear the debris. The sheer volume of this operation forces the canal authority to operate like a high-speed mining syndicate. They continually stabilize the newly exposed trench walls with heavy steel rock bolts and thick layers of sprayed concrete. This prevents catastrophic landslides during intense regional monsoons. By aggressively securing the structural integrity of the channel, they guarantee safe passage for heavily loaded cargo ships. The entire process requires a flawless symphony of mechanical power, raw chemistry, and strict logistical discipline. At the Qinzhou port terminus, marine construction crews finalized a massive gravity wharf in April 2026. This heavy concrete structure allows 10,000-ton cargo vessels to moor autonomously. The facility completely removes the need for slow mechanical tugboat assistance during standard docking procedures. It dramatically accelerates port call times, turning a sluggish nautical maneuver into a rapid, automated transfer. The entire Pingloo Canal project was launched with an aggressive, uncompromising completion schedule. While Western environmental audits routinely trap vital infrastructure projects in a decade of legal purgatory, Chinese crews topped out this vital gravity wharf just 8 months after initial construction began. The Canal Authority is actively preparing the waterway for full commercial navigation by September 2026. Contrast this hyper-efficient, vertically integrated excavation with a legacy Western work site. A traditional European or North American canal expansion suffers from highly fragmented international supply chains. Contractors wait agonizing months for specialized heavy machinery imported across multiple sovereign borders. When a single hydraulic excavator breaks down, the entire worksite grinds to a devastating halt. The Pingloo project completely neutralizes this supply chain vulnerability. The heavy equipment, the electric conveyor belts, and the structural steel are all manufactured inside local domestic factories. When a tungsten carbide drill bit shatters against hard limestone, a replacement arrives from a regional foundry in mere hours. This absolute domestic integration allows the excavation to continue 24 hours a day. The project remains entirely unaffected by global shipping crises or foreign trade embargoes. This raw velocity completely outpaces the construction timelines of legacy global waterways. The canal requires a massive capital investment of $10.2 billion. This represents a targeted financial deployment large enough to construct a fleet of modern nuclear submarines. It is one of the largest earth and rockwork projects attempted in modern history. The state considers this an absolute strategic necessity to develop Guangxi and Yunnan as premier gateways to the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. By pouring limitless capital into the domestic heavy machinery sector, China accelerates its own internal economic circulation. They are building a physical monument to absolute industrial independence. The ultimate geopolitical weapon of the Pingloo Canal is its absolute immunity to severe climate shocks. Right now, the Panama Canal Authority is fighting a losing battle against raw biological reality. A devastating regional drought has severely depleted Gatun Lake. This vital freshwater reservoir is strictly required to operate the massive locks that connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. To preserve their shrinking water supply, authority officials blindly slashed daily transit slots and imposed brutal draft restrictions on cargo vessels. Global trade watchdogs point out that these desperate rationing protocols instantly paralyze international commerce. Shipping conglomerates bleed massive amounts of capital, waiting weeks for passage. They desperately try to navigate a slowly dying waterway that can no longer support modern freight demands. The Pingloo Canal completely bypasses this fatal climate vulnerability. The advanced water-saving basins and pneumatic anti-saltwater gates installed at the Qingyin hub serve a critical strategic purpose. This specific fluid dynamics mechanism becomes a lethal logistical advantage. By flawlessly recycling 63% of its inland water, the canal refuses to bleed its freshwater reserves into the Beibu Gulf. The pneumatic gates physically trap dense ocean tides at the estuarine boundary. They isolate the corrosive saltwater and force it back into the sea before it can contaminate the inland aquifer. This micromechanism guarantees an uninterrupted, high-volume flow of 10,000-ton freighters regardless of severe regional droughts. The canal remains 100% operational year-round, entirely divorced from the unpredictable climate variables destroying Western logistics hubs. This absolute operational reliability acts as a massive economic magnet for Southeast Asian trade. Historically, the inland provinces of Sichuan, Yunnan, and Guizhou suffered from a brutal geographic penalty. Their massive exports of phosphate fertilizer, industrial aluminum, and dense agricultural goods were physically trapped. Logistics companies were forced to navigate 560 unnecessary kilometers eastward through the heavily saturated Pearl River Delta. This convoluted detour artificially inflated prices and delayed critical deliveries to ASEAN markets. It effectively walled off the deep interior from participating in lucrative international export networks. The $10.2 billion Pingloo Canal permanently deletes this geographic tax. It establishes a straight-line, deep-water corridor directly connecting the inland Sijin Reservoir to the open waters of the Beibu Gulf. This massive geographic shortcut generates an estimated $730 million in pure annual logistics savings. This staggering financial retention is calculated across a projected cargo volume of 89 million tons per year, rapidly rising to 95 million tons by 2035. Buyers across Vietnam, Malaysia, and the wider Gulf of Tonkin will suddenly access inland Chinese commodities at unprecedented rock-bottom prices. This new pricing structure completely destroys the legacy trade models built around the Guangdong Premium. For decades, ASEAN importers were forced to absorb the high inland freight costs associated with the old Pearl River routes. Direct Beibu Gulf access removes that cost penalty instantly. Port-oriented industries focused on heavy chemicals, bulk raw materials, and advanced equipment manufacturing are already gathering along the new canal corridor. In the reverse direction, ASEAN exporters of rubber, rice, and processed food gain a highly lucrative, low-cost access route directly into China's interior consumer markets. The freight rates, port relationships, and supplier pricing structures that traders meticulously built around the Guangdong corridor must now be completely renegotiated. The canal forces a massive realignment of regional value chains. Maritime economists argue that the traders who reprice their supply lines earliest will capture a devastating market advantage. The Beibu Gulf Port Group, consolidating terminals in Qinzhou, Fangchenggang, and Beihai, has rapidly accelerated berth expansions. They handled over 10 million TEUs in 2025 and are actively preparing to absorb the massive volume of cargo the canal will soon direct southward. By successfully linking the upper reaches of the Yinjiang River directly to the sea, China converts geographic proximity into inescapable economic gravity. The Pingloo Canal serves as a strategic instrument designed to accelerate regional integration and fortify supply chains across Southeast Asia. It is not merely a new shipping lane. It is a permanent, climate-proof pipeline designed to starve the old maritime guard while cementing Chinese logistics supremacy for the next century. The compounding 10-year outlook for this mega canal actively shifts the economic center of gravity across Asia. In August 2026, the Guangxi Maritime Safety Administration successfully executed the first full route navigation patrol. Using the advanced Haishun 1003 patrol vessel, maritime crews traveled the entire 134.2-kilometer newly excavated corridor, successfully passing through the colossal Madao, Qixi, and Qingyan lock hubs. This live-fire hardware test provided the exact operational data required to finalize emergency protocols ahead of the canal's official commercial opening in September 2026. To ensure absolute maritime security across this new artery, the state deployed heavy-duty enforcement technology. The Haishun 1003 is equipped with a highly advanced marine electro-optical tracking system, operating seamlessly in infrared, monochrome, and laser modes to monitor traffic in zero-visibility weather conditions. The vessel easily withstands Force 9 winds on the Beaufort scale, which produce punishing 9-meter waves. By validating these extreme weather tolerances, the Canal Authority guarantees that the waterway remains a heavily fortified, deeply secure logistics corridor, regardless of severe seasonal typhoons. At this very moment, a monumental logistics network called the new International Land-Sea Trade Corridor is coming online. For decades, landlocked western provinces like Sichuan, Guizhou, and Chongqing suffered from a punishing export bottleneck because their river networks could not directly reach the ocean. By completing this national-level mega-project, China officially connects the Silk Road economic belt directly to the maritime trade routes of the south. Cargo starting at the Pingtang River estuary in Hangzhou that historically crawled eastward toward Guangzhou can now turn south, slicing approximately 560 kilometers off the journey as it follows the Xinjiang River into the Beibu Gulf. To grasp the operational superiority of this new route, analyze the raw throughput capacity. The Pingloo Canal is specifically engineered to seamlessly accommodate 5,000-ton cargo vessels. Rather than relying on scattered, highly fragmented railway transfers or inefficient overland trucking, massive fleets of heavy freighters will glide smoothly down the newly carved river straight into the open ocean. This creates an uninterrupted, high-capacity conveyor belt for bulk commodities. This localized efficiency scales rapidly into global dominance. During the first half of 2026 alone, the broader trade corridor network handled over 517 billion yuan in imports and exports, representing a 13% year-on-year surge. As the canal transitions into full commercial operation, that volume will compound aggressively. Industrial manufacturers are already abandoning saturated eastern ports to establish new advanced production hubs along the Guangxi Canal economic belt. The regional government is actively building a layered coastal industrial pattern, turning the canal into the ultimate economic spine. Western shipping authorities remain paralyzed by crumbling infrastructure, endlessly debating municipal budgets while vital supply chains choke. The Pingloo Canal demonstrates a completely different operational reality. By pouring over 70 billion yuan, roughly $10.37 billion into this singular backbone project, Beijing successfully bypassed legacy maritime constraints. They engineered an autonomous, high-speed artery that perfectly insulates domestic commerce from external logistical friction. This permanent 100-year waterway fundamentally dictates the future speed of Asian trade. Southeast Asian markets are rapidly integrating into this frictionless corridor, securing a direct, low-cost pipeline to China's massive interior. The nations that aggressively plug their supply chains into this newly carved river will dominate the next century of global logistics. The era of relying on congested, climate-vulnerable maritime choke points is officially over. China physically carved a $10.37 billion artificial river through a mountain range to bypass failing global logistics routes completely. By launching the Pingloo Canal, they engineered a frictionless, high-volume trade pipeline that permanently shifts the economic gravity of Southeast Asia. Legacy maritime monopolies, desperately patching their century-old locks, have already lost this supply chain war. If an autonomous 134-kilometer man-made river can slash transit times by 560 kilometers and reshape international trade, can traditional Western shipping lanes even survive the next decade of infrastructure decay? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below.